Alright, listen. I just got back from seeing Superman, and oh yeah. After the longest gap between Superman movies since Christopher Reeve first donned the cape and years of build-up, I'm happy to say that this film delivers in a number of ways. I can't help but talk about it. I'll start with some spoiler-free discussion and move into spoilers later on. Don't worry, there will be clear indication when we head into spoiler territory. The first obvious thing that I'm drawn to talk about for this video is any standouts in the movie. Usually you'll have a couple of characters or specific storylines that stand above the rest, but I don't really think that applies here. The main characters, Clark, Lois, and Lex, were obviously really strong, but Krypto, Jimmy, and especially Mr. Terrific went off. Even then, I wouldn't say that any of that stands head and shoulders above the rest of the movie. Metamorpho, the Justice Gang, Perry White, Ma and Pa Kent, Steve Lombard, and other smaller characters are a lot of fun and are great within their roles in the story, and definitely have their time to shine. One thing I really appreciated about the movie is the amount of emphasis it puts on Superman's core values. We've all seen the "people are going to die" from the trailers, and that scene is a great example of it, but it's a consistent pattern throughout the movie. Hope, love, and life are pulled to the forefront on most, if not all, of the major beats, which is great to see. Gunn is kind of known by now for putting a lot of emphasis on these things, especially in relation to kids and animals, and that's very clearly still present in this movie. That is, at least in my opinion, what makes Gunn a good choice for directing this film. The only big complaint when it comes to Gunn's tendencies is, at least to me, that the comedic elements were at times very slightly overplayed. It didn't bother me, but I did notice it and thought to myself a couple times that I would have preferred if they played this straight. This is a trade-off I will gladly make for the emotional core and deep understanding of Superman present here. The emphasis on saving people, the opposition to killing, or rather proactive prevention of death, the politics, and the strong characters all more than make up for any minor issues I have with it. The main complaint I've been seeing about the movie is that it feels more like a part 2 than a part 1, especially to people that aren't all that into superhero movies or Superman as a character. I can't really speak to the last part, I'm afraid I'm a Superman fan, sue me, but I can speak to the first part. To me, this issue is twofold. On one hand, there is an established world. When it comes to the Justice Gang, there's clearly some stuff in the past that's already happened, and you can tell with Lex the Engineer and Ultraman that there's a history there. But at least to me, it doesn't feel like there's a full story missing there. I do believe there's a prequel book for people that do want that, but overall, I'm largely good with it. The only exceptions to this are the Engineer and Ultraman, who could have done with a little more in my opinion. This is all to say, when it comes to Clark, Lois, Lex, and their supporting casts, I don't think it feels like a part 2 at all. In fact, it's a really good starting arc, taking inspiration from Smallville, the Donner films, various comics, and other sources. It's definitely still a part 1. If I were to give it a rating out of 10, I'd probably go for a solid 9 at the moment. Are there things that I would have preferred done differently? Sure, a couple. Does this absolutely hit all the big marks that I want for a Superman movie? Also yes. It wonderfully mixes and respects a lot of previous adaptations while building a strong identity of its own for the characters and universe. I don't know if this is as classic as that first Reeve movie, but I definitely think it's a great shot at a more modern version of that kind of story, with a wonderful and genuine Superman making use of better developed VFX and a general audience more accustomed to superhero films and fantastical elements to craft a great movie. I'm not sure if I'm willing to say this is Gunn's best film, as it's apparent to me that he had to hold back a little bit of his own style to make it more palatable for the general audience, but I definitely put it up in the top 3 alongside Guardians 3 and the Suicide Squad. I'm thoroughly satisfied, but at the end of the day, I am me. So I have to elaborate on all of that. And to do that, I have to get into spoilers. So please click off the video if you haven't seen the movie. Come back later. I'll wait. Okay, are you ready? As per usual with Gunn's work, the characters are very strong. He said himself that he considers this the first superhero movie he's made, and that's very apparent in how he handles the characters. Superman is unambiguously good. Lex Luthor is unambiguously evil. The film doesn't shy away from extremes, and that works enormously to its credit. Having a Superman that isn't really all that much about fighting, but cares so much about saving people and animals is so beautiful. Superman saving a squirrel is up there as one of my favorite moments of the movie. It's so very him. Crucially, they don't waste time setting these characters up. The first thing Lois does when we see her alone is pick up a baseball bat because she thinks someone's broken into her apartment. That's really great. Something that I think is really important in a Superman movie is nailing the Clark and Lois dynamic. They need to play off of each other. They need to encourage each other to grow, and they need to function very differently from one another. They get that right really quickly in this movie. The interview scene is a really good way to establish both of the characters and immediately get that dynamic down. For a while after this, Clark and Lois don't really interact all that much. They meet up only a couple times before the climax, but just with this scene, it gives us enough of the characters to make everything go smoothly. Crucially, Lois isn't tied down to Clark that much. She's proactive and independent and is never saved by another character. Mr. Terrific protects her, sure, but Lois is never a damsel in distress. But that dynamic doesn't just end there. There's two other characters that are part of that puzzle that I think are very important. On one hand, we have Jimmy Olsen. Now, I have a great sin to admit to. I've never really cared all that much about Jimmy. I recognize his importance. He is a crucial part of the story. I'm not trying to downplay that, but I don't really care all that much about him. He was good in this. The actor did a good job. I'm just largely indifferent to him as a character or part of the story. I like that he got the story on Lex out, I guess. It is slightly weird that the photographer is the one to do that over either of the investigative journalists, but I don't really care all that much about that. He's there. It works. That's all I have to say about him. A character I do have a lot to say about, on the other hand, is Lex Luthor. I love this version of Lex. I've been saying for a while that Nicholas Hoult as Lex is my favorite casting in the DCU so far, and it holds up. Most of these castings are insane, by the way. This one just happens to be my favorite. Two scenes really stick out to me as being perfectly emblematic of this version of Lex. Firstly, Lex murdering Molly positions him as such a psychopath. I love it. The unmitigated evil that Lex brings into the movie is wonderful, and that scene is the perfect example. He really just wants to keep Superman alive to torture him for as long as possible and then kill him. It's great. The other scene I want to bring up has Lex smashing a cup of pencils and commanding his people to pick it up just because he's in a pissy mood. When they do, he knocks the cup down again for them to pick it up once more. This showcases Lex's sadism and megalomania very well. While Superman is soothed by images of his parents telling him that his purpose is to help people, Lex is soothed by the suffering of others for his betterment. It shows the differences between these characters very effectively and puts him down as an evil, miserable monster. Lovely. It's a perfect mix of the cool and collected, evil, follically challenged businessman we've seen from Michael Rosenbaum and Clancy Brown, and the more exaggerated supervillain role we've seen from Gene Hackman. Again, this is an example of Gunn taking inspiration from across the character's history and mixing it all together. I find the Justice Gang really interesting on a bunch of different levels. They're introduced as worse heroes than Superman, but then who isn't, right? They're more practical, more corporate and aggressive. It brings up a bunch of questions that aren't really answered, but I quite like that. The biggest one is that of killing. Superman starts the movie completely against the idea of killing anything, and is saddened and even annoyed that the Justice Gang is so intent on immediately killing the big monster rampaging through the city, even if that's not very practical. It's a nice way of reinforcing that dynamic he has with Lois. He's not a very practical person. He's a bit naive and very idealistic. But that's good. That's what makes him who he is. Superman does end up killing Ultraman, but it's made clear that he has no free will and is directly controlled by Lex Luthor, down to every movement he makes in a fight. Nevertheless, Clark is saddened by the fact that he has to kill Ultraman to save the city. That's great. It's a very small arc for Clark, embracing a slightly more practical angle while not compromising on his broader worldview. The more interesting thing to me is the killing of Vasil Garkos at the hands of Hawkgirl, because practically, what is the alternative? Let him live and the attempts to wipe out Jarhumpurians continues? Intimidate him, even slightly torture him, and that doesn't work, so what then? Well, you have to kill him. Superman could never do that, so she does. This isn't something that's explored much, but it's an interesting thing to touch on, works with the themes, and can be explored in future projects in the DCU. The characters of the Justice Gang themselves are also very fun. Shout out Guy Gardner for being an insufferable ass, love to see it. Hawkgirl was fun, Metamorpho was very good in the time that we got with him, and Mr. Terrific was obviously the standout of those four. I find it very funny that they took things that are typically associated with Batman and hit you over the head with, no, that's Mr. Terrific. Like the nanite trackers. All the cool things people like about Batman works better with and are actually part of another character. Okay, so there's a lot I like, but I do have a couple of problems with the movie. A common issue people have with the movie is that the dialogue is a little cringe at times. I can't necessarily disagree with that. I don't mind that much because it generally works for the characters, but it can be a little off every now and again. My personal big problem is that a couple of the scenes feel a bit clunky. The river in the pocket dimension, for example, lasts lasts a bit too long. It works fine, but it does go on a bit. These are very little things, so I don't care all that much, but it still bugs me a little. The visual style of the Pocket Dimension also is a bit of an eyesore because of how long it goes on and how chaotic the cinematography is. There's a few other things. Ron Troop doesn't do much, for example. I feel like some stuff was cut from the Daily Planet because he's treated as fairly important, but he has like 5 speaking lines. Similarly, I've heard that it was supposed to have title cards for each day and now it just cuts to black. I feel like the days would have been better. Like I said earlier, the Engineer and Ultraman felt a little tacked on. They would have profited from a little more time. I don't think you could cut either of them, but I would have liked some more. The same thing with Ron Troop applies here. It feels like some stuff got cut, and it does make Ultraman's identity reveal pretty underwhelming to me. This movie is positioned in relation to a bunch of different movies, and the parallels are pretty interesting. The first and most obvious is the Man of Steel and Batman v Superman connection. Henry Cavill is the most recent movie version of Superman, so it makes sense that there'd be a comparison, but it goes a bit further. Superman being called for arrest by the government, the public being turned against him by Lex Luthor, an attempt to apply real-world politics to Superman, the works. This movie does that way better than Snyder's films. The Snyder films were making an attempt to put Superman in the real world. They failed, largely because they didn't actually put Superman in the real world. That's someone else. This movie actually does something with the real world parallels, while Snyder's films were more interested with forcing Superman into a little box. That's the difference. Gunn's Superman soars. Snyder's Superman barely walks. There's a lot of talk about David Corenswet's Superman and Robert Pattinson's Batman being in the same universe. While I really don't want that, the movies can be compared. The Batman was all about Batman learning his heroism, while Superman is all about that heroism shining bright from the start. They both represent hope, just in very different ways. Before you type your little comment, by the way, I don't like the idea of the Batman being in the DCU because of the implications for the Bat family. That's why I know it's not going to happen. If the Batman is part of the DCU, it's either set in the past, which I'm not interested in, or one of two things happens. Either Matt Reeves is completely limited because he has to rapidly introduce Bat family members, or we have to wait more than a decade for an even slightly formed Bat family. Either way, not interested. Still, the thematic connection is interesting. It should be noted that The Batman is one of the most celebrated comic book movies ever, and Superman is hopefully also going to be appreciated like that. And they both focus a lot on the main character properly being a superhero. Take notes, Marvel. Speaking of which, Superman's relationship to the MCU is pretty important. The DCEU suffered a lot from trying to catch up to the MCU, rushing its Justice League and major storylines like the death of Superman in its second movie. This movie takes its time and doesn't rush that too much. It's pretty advanced in terms of what's already set up in the world with the Justice Gang and other things, but it never feels like it's trying to do that to set up the universe. It's only doing that because it serves the story directly. No looking at YouTube videos to set up the Justice League, no death of Superman, just the movie. Lastly, it wouldn't be the Kiwi video if we didn't talk about the politics of this film. It's very unapologetically left-leaning, and it really couldn't have been anything else. There was a bit of this in the marketing, if only the week before release, with James and Sean Gunn, as well as David Corenswet, talking about the pro-immigrant themes. We've all seen this image floating around. No, but that's not where the film leaves it. The conflict between Boravia and Jaranbur is central to the plot and isn't a very subtle stand-in for the Israel-Palestine conflict. The broad strokes of it are taken pretty directly from the comics, but adapting it now and with this context makes it very clear that this was intentionally about Palestine. And good. If you look around my channel, it'll become increasingly apparent that I'm kind of sick of most superhero movies, Marvel, being center-right at best. It's weird generally, obviously because it's blatantly incorrect and immoral in most cases, and because superheroes are a broadly left-leaning concept, but it's weirdest with Superman. This is the guy that started out fighting abusers, corruption, and the police. If you don't let him be blatantly progressive, you're not doing anything right. So they did it. It's not like we have Superman claiming a political ideology, but this is what his behavior points to. It's only a natural extension of Gunn's work. If you look at the Suicide Squad, it's pretty clear that left-leaning critique of the United States government and its foreign policy is on the mind, and that's developed pretty well in here. I'm sure there's some analysis to be done about Superman saving a country that's supposed to be in the Middle East and the white savior thing there. I don't think this is particularly egregious in this film. It seems to be more about giving the people the power necessary to fight back against their oppression and doing that in the form of superheroes fighting alongside them. There's definitely something to be said about the conflict being used as a diversion, but the fact that that's problematic, or whatever word fits here, is directly the point and used to build the characters, so I don't really care all that much. Same thing with Clark being lured back to Metropolis while the war is about to begin again. Is it positioning the core of the conflict around the US rather than the other very important place? Yes, because Luthor explicitly planned it that way, and he's in the US, which to him means that it's important because he has an ego the size of a solar system. More than anything, this has me excited for the future of the DCU. If this is just the first film made by the guy in charge and they're explicitly focusing on variety and tone, the future is looking up. Supergirl was set up pretty well in this film. Her characterization fits with the start of Woman of Tomorrow, the comic they're adapting for the movie, and making clear that Krypto will be in it is an obvious bonus. Clayface by Mike Flanagan has me very interested. The Peacemaker cameo in this movie brings up a fair few questions that I'm excited to see answered in Peacemaker next month. I might make a similar video to this one about Peacemaker Season 2, by the way. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. Beyond the coming year or so in the DCU, they're cooking up a lot of stuff that I can't wait to see. The Batman Part 2, an actually good Wonder Woman movie, Waller show, Blue Beetle show, Booster Gold show. I'm all in for it. Alright, I was about to end this video off, but then I realized I hadn't talked about the discourse around this movie at all. I also can't be bothered to actually talk about that. Super woke is the dumbest thing I've heard in a while, and that's saying a lot. That being said, I had to see this tweet, and now you have to as well. None of this is true. Stop. Green Arrow absolutely hates far-right people. Hal Jordan is not an outspoken conservative. Reading is not that hard. Safe to say, at this point, I love this movie. It's not flawless, but it is pure Superman. Its dedication to the core values of Superman, presenting the character defined in the source material, building its world, and giving all its characters an active role really just goes to show you that it's very possible to make a good Superman movie. It shows that he doesn't have to be boring, and it shows hope. And that's just what a Superman movie needs. Now, I have to go watch this movie again. Don't forget to be a good person and have a good one.